welcome to everyone to this talk. I'm really happy to be able to be here today remotely, but to be here today and have the honor to speak at this occasion. I know it's the second time that you're having someone from ISU speaking to you. One of my colleagues presented earlier in the late last year, but I think today the topic at the difference of last time would be really more. I will present ISU, but I will also go more into content than the last one. The presentation today will be structured about three main elements. First, rapid description, the presentation of what is ISU. Then we'll discuss what is the space sector and the new space economy to reflect of the ongoing changes and trends in the sector that are impacting the space economy. So a few words about ISU. You know ISU. It's the sole university worldwide devoted to space education since 1987. It's based in Strasbourg, France, that's where we have the headquarters, but we have hubs in the USA, as well as the Asia Pacific region. And we work with the major organizations such as UCL, and we are really proud to have such a partner with us. So it's a 35 years success story. We have more than 5,200 alumni shaping the space sector in over 110 countries. And we have had the chance to have very high level graduates from our programs that have ended up as astronauts, that flew to space or that are in the current astronaut corps, but also entrepreneurs, and as well as industry leaders or governmental leaders. So this is just a small map to show where we have alums of the program, but we're also very happy to have a high-level faculty, and I will talk about that in a few seconds. So at ISU, the students, because we might have some students on the call today, we have up to now what was called the 3 I's: international, interdisciplinary, and intercultural approach. And that's where we also have the chance to have renowned faculty and visiting lecturers. And we have two today. We have Serge Platard and Henry Herzfeld that are, for instance, lecturing in my field of expertise, which is policy, economics, and law. And this is a very beneficial for the students to have such renowned experts teaching. But we also have the largest networks in space, but also good resources for education and training. And some of the example of where we have people working at is just to illustrate the geographical diversity, but also the type of actors, established actors, new companies, entrepreneurs, and so on. So very diverse. But ISU is changing, so is the space sector. So we have, I would say, a fourth eye at ISU, and that's also brings, it's in line with the topic of today, which is we have created an incubator. And since a few years, we encourage entrepreneurship in all our programs and activities in order to help the space economy to grow. And then we teach space management and business in all of our activities, but we also created an incubator hosted at ISU Central Campus, and we help for pre-incubation up to incubation, because we realized that we had up to a few years ago a very successful virtual spin-off rate of company created. Why do I say virtual? Because they were created outside the ISU ecosystem. They were met or educated at ISU. Some business plans such as Spire have been generated as part of exercise in our program, but they were created outside. And we decided to create an incubator to help provide these benefits to the ISU alumni, because we had created over 110 startups in 27 countries from alumni. Right now, we have 7 startups in our incubators. And to complement that, we created last fall a space policy and entrepreneurship lab that Serge Patard just mentioned. A few words on that. the lab is there really to bridge the gap between space policy and space policy / space economy and incubation. So have a feedback loop between the theory and the praxis. So for instance, to discuss with the startup that we are incubating, what the type do they need in terms of support to innovation on the soft side, such as policy recommendation, and we are trying to discuss with regional authorities, local authorities to potential solution to look into that, but also make recommendation at higher level. We are very fortunate to build upon the faculty we have in Strasbourg, such as, for instance, Professor Peters, that, for instance, provided a very interesting definition of what new space is. And we really want to be a platform to provide a neutral platform to provide different views on how the space sector and in this domain is evolving. So now going into the presentation, I have a few set of questions because we are all used to go into the digital environment and teaching classes in that context and to make it interactive, and especially since now we are a bit each of us are beyond a screen. I will start with a quote by someone that said, many people have said that the fastest way to make a small fortune in the aerospace industry is to start with a large one. So this person is Elon Musk. So one of the most, if not the most successful investor in the space sector, because he is at the helm of a company that is the second most valuable company, not on the stock market, second only to the parent company of TikTok, that is SpaceX, and SpaceX is an octocorn. Unicorn, decacorn, and octocorn. So it's a company worth more than 100 billion valuation with SpaceX. But this aphorism is something very traditional up to now in the space sector, that if you want to make a lot of money, you start with even more money. But things start to change, and that's I will try to talk about that, because we are seeing a different way of how the sector is evolving. Another one is, what is the space sector? Because us among the space community have a certain understanding of what is the sector, but it might mean different things to different people, and there are different definitions that do exist, but it is generally considered as encompassing the full range of space activities. And so what is it made of? We all have heard about upstream, midstreams, and downstreams. Those are the traditional way of how the space sector is grouped. So for the upstreams, it's the manufacturing of satellite or launchers. The midstream is the operators or the operation of the satellite or the launch vehicle. And the downstreams is the service providers. So those are like the way the space sector is described. But then if you look at the markets, those are different. And some of the markets have different dynamics, because some of these markets are already established. The launch industry, communication for satellite-based telecommunication, Earth observation, position, navigation, and timing, and so on. Very established. Other ones are starting. Markets are starting, such as space tourism, Sir Branson versus Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk's providing space tourism, personal space flight beyond low Earth orbit, on-orbit servicing, ISS servicing. So those are starting. They are there, but they're like picking up speed. Other ones are emerging: space resource utilization, on-orbit manufacturing and assembly, debris removal, for instance. So you can see that when we talk about the space sector, there are different dynamics at play depending on the markets, and some are more mature than other ones. But it begs also the question, what is a space company? There again, people will say, the one I present on the slides, it's all known for. Lockheed Martin, US aerospace giant. I say aerospace, but very much also involved into space. The same for Airbus Defence and Space, like a European heavyweights in the domain, with spread across different countries, the UK, Germany, France, Spain, developing launch vehicles, satellites, SpaceX that I mentioned, doing launch vehicle, or now developing its own constellation of satellite for telecommunication, or Planet. The reason I'm putting Planet is only as an example, because it's a more recent company that has been introduced into the stock market. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but also because it's one of the co-founders is an alumni of ISU. But those are, people will say, clear cut, we agree, those are space companies. But now I will say, is John Deere a space company? And you will say, why John Deere? Well, John Deere is a US giant in the field of agriculture that has been using space since the 90s, and especially for augmented navigation system for its truck, in order to be more efficient into precision agriculture. So it has been using space technology and augmentation system for more than 30 years. And so it's embedded in almost all of it's embedded into all its new lineup of products. So that's an example for in the agricultural domain, where you have a company that is really already using space for many, many years. Another one I would quote as an example is Geely. Geely might be less known to the audience today, but Geely is a major car manufacturer in China. So it's equivalent to GM or Vauxhall or Opel and so on. But it's a private company in China that has decided to build its own constellation of connectivity satellites. So it's building its own connectivity satellites to be able to provide data for connectivity, and also for positioning to its future cars fleet, including, among others, vehicle-to-vehicle V2X communication. So you have on one hand agriculture, on the other one you have transport sector using space, and I will pick a last example, ExxonMobil, the US energy giant, that will launch in cooperation with satellite manufacturing its own constellation of satellite to monitor its activities, and including methane reporting. So here you can see with 3 different examples of company that could be seen as fringe or could be part of the mainstream space company, depending on where you put yourself. So what is then the space economy? There are also here different definitions about what it is, but it's generally considered as encompassing both the core space activities as well as the enabled economic and societal impacts conferred by space activities. So here I've put that together just to try, in my understanding, and for the objective of the discussion today, to show what it is. So you have the space sector in blue, which is the heart, the core of the sector, with the manufacturing, the operation, and the application. And you have the economy going a bit beyond, with the commercial users, the public users, and the consumers. And now we need to understand that what is changing, what is different, but also what are the limitations with the space economy. First, space economy is heavily pervasive in our economy, especially now that we're becoming more and more data reliant. We all have a smartphone, and I hope you are not looking at your smartphone right now, but if you look, please then go to check if you have a navigation-enabled system. You will see that you have a chipset that most of the time rely on more than one service provider for your positioning system. It can be GPS, most historical one, but you could have also access to GLONASS, the Russian system, Galileo, European system, depending on the case, or the one like Baidu or Gagan. So, but that really shows that space is really, and we don't really notice that it's really part of the infrastructure of the backbone of our economies. But one of the issues, and that's where Henry Herschel is very aware of, is that national statistics across the world do not collect data accurately. And for instance, in most cases, it could be grouped with aerospace, while aerospace is aeronautic and space. Rockets could be part of the same classification as missiles and launch vehicles, so that make it very difficult to have a concrete understanding of what the size of the space sector is and the economy. Then if you look at space report, most of the time there's a limited methodology insights, could have error of currency, double counting, fiscal years closing, extrapolation, and so on. So really need to improve the measurement of the space economy and its impact. So now that leads to the discussion about the new space economy. Because we see key trends, both in terms of public engagement in space, as well as private engagement in space. And that's the elements I will be discussing in the next few minutes. First, in terms of public engagement into space, it's important to really understand that there are different approaches by government depending on their environment, being in their environment, meaning their ecosystem they have in place in their own country, but also because of their history. But what is important is that most more countries are entering the field and they are no longer starting with activities with low technical complexity or starting with the establishment of a space agency. You see new countries deciding to invest into space activities already being more ambitious because there is in some domains a lower barrier to entry. But then nonetheless, this is important. You don't need to be a space power or to have a space agency to be involved in the sector. You also don't necessarily need to have a full-fledged industrial base covering the whole supply chain to be able to have sophisticated space capability. More and more, since the end of the Cold War, there's more technology transfer. There are more and more countries on the market providing different type of solutions that you can access, you can buy, being it a platform for a satellite. You can outsource the operation of the satellites. A lot of different innovative ways that the private companies are leveraging, but that means that you don't necessarily need to have the full-fledged chain in your country to be able to motivate yourself to invest. There's also a lot of acknowledgement by governments that to have at the same time civilian and commercial space activities enable organizational efficiencies in a country and make sure that you can have more impact with the resources you put in place. And there are also more emerging alternatives to the traditional space leaders. That means now other countries that were not traditionally technology exporters or leaders of great scientific missions are finding their way in the global supply chains of space services and products, providing different bricks or building blocks that can help other ones to leverage upon. And also because there is a shift from buying technologies and products to buying services, and that makes the governments for sometimes more able to leverage more results with the same amount of currency. So this is one of the examples provided by the company Euroconsult that shows just in one map here. What is important is not necessarily the size of the bubbles that depict the public investment in space, but to see the amount of bubble. And just to show you that there is a space, countries investing in space spreading across the world. So it's not only limited to Europe or to North America, but it's really going around the world, leading really to an internationalization and globalization of space activities because it's north and south, east and west. So this is very, very telling. And that also explains why we see a changing space context and therefore a changing space economy. So this is on the public side. Now, if you go into the private side, you also see an evolution of the context. Here, I just want to show you with this graph, and I will not go into detail, but it's something I've put together to try to show that there are different types of investor. You can see on the column on the left, the type of investor that have different characteristics, and they invest different type of amount of money using different investment types with different expected results. But here, what is just important is to realize that there are You have angel investors. Maybe some of you are angel investors. Usually, it's individuals or family offices and so on. You have venture capital firms, private equity, corporation, bank, and public market. What we see is that historically, angel investors and venture capital have been very much involved into the space sector, especially in the US. Private equity firms such as KKR and the big ones a bit less, but they are getting there. And you can really see that the diversity of private investor in the space sector is increasing. And I will also bring to your attention the expected return on investment and the exit horizon, because that has an impact on the economy we see right now. So to give you some of some latest figures, because I think that's what is important, we've seen in 2020, according to Bryce Corporation, 342 investors that invested in 124 startup companies, and including 211 new investors. So this is very much telling, because that means you have 211 investors that have been invested in 2020. And if you look at the repartition of the investment on the survey they've made over 20 years, you can see that 50%, more than 50%, has been done by venture capital firms, 20% by angel investors. As I said before, those are they represent the lion's shares of investment. So that's 72%, almost 3/4. And the rest is led by investment by corporation. So that's direct investment, private equity firm, and banks. But you can see that the ecosystem is changing, because it's moving from angel investors to VC firms, and the trend is ongoing. But if you look over the 20 years, you have a certain image. But now if you zoom in into the number of deals that we have seen over that period of time, we can really see there's a paradigm shift since the beginning of the last decade, where for the first time it has been reported more than 20 deals in the number of startup space deals per year, with 2011 a bit more than 20. And since then, you can see that there's a constant growth based on the information reported by this company, leading into a peak in 2019 with 169 deals. Okay, in 2020, this number went a bit lower to 140. We are looking forward to have the data for 2021, consolidated data, to see with the same methodology what's happening. But you can already see that 2020, for the one that have not realized that we're still living in COVID, 2020 was the year of a lot of the lockdowns. Still you were not able to travel freely, and when you realize that there were still 140 deals in an economy that was very much limited in terms of the traditional way of doing, where you have to do investor speech, you have to go to the Silicon Valley, you have to meet investor roadshows and so on. With this context of limited overseas travel, you still had 140 deals is very, very much impressive. But I will put a big but. Here we can see an increase of the number of deals, but I will put there that I see the Pareto principle of 1980 for startup financing. That is that we see that 20% of the startups get about 80% of the financing. So that means even though there are more investment into a bigger number or bigger pool of company, there's a concentration of financial resources of high rounds into a certain subset of those companies. So that means every company, every startup is not equal in the chance of receiving funding. And now if you look into 2021, the latest data, you can see that this money is even higher, because we had venture capital invested about $17 billion in 328 space companies. So almost twice more than last year. But what is interesting is to see that space is becoming mainstream, because up to now it was not necessarily a domain where the private sector, the private financial sector, has been investing into space as a domain of growth, because it always thought that it might be difficult, might be risky. But if we look at the total amount of venture capital fund invested all over across all domains, we can see that space represented 3% of the total global venture capital fund, which is not bad, because it really shows that people are actually more and more people are believing into the space sector as being also a domain of where you can make money out of it. And also there are a couple of other indicators that are very interesting, because for instance, Sierra Space was the second largest early stage venture capital mega deal. A mega deal is a deal that is priced above $100 million. So it was the second largest in any sector in 2021, with a Series A deal of $1.4 billion. So that's very telling. And there were, other mega deals for space companies. So you can see here the logo are displayed. So you have Oak Eyes, ABL, ISAR, Loft Orbital, Astronaut, Firefly, Relativity, Axiom, Astroscale. And yes, you are seeing correctly, I put twice SpaceX. This is not a cut and paste mistake. It's simply because they did two mega rounds, and that shows because of the valuation of the company, because of the development of Starship and Starlink. But here we really see that a lot of private capital is coming into the sector. But again, just showing the diversity of mega deals, you can see that there is some variety, but not that much. Overall, 2021 was a record year for investment in space, with 46 billion invested in the sector as a whole, with space infrastructure being the main part, with $14 billion. That's more than 50% the investments of 2020. And what is also important is the exit. To get a sense of the economy, and the exit was about $38.5 billion through 34 space company exit in 2021, mainly through acquisition by either corporation, SPACs, and IPOs. And SPACs is really one of the elements driving what I call new, in parentheses, space economy. Because SPACs is one of the latest investments that has been using on the stock market. You might have been familiar with that. You've read it through in 2021 in the news. So SPACs are special purpose acquisition companies that are companies that are already traded on the stock market, that exist there to raise money, and then to merge with potential targets in different domains. So there might be SPACs in general focusing on certain technology. Some are very generic. So SPACs also is a difference compared to traditional IPO, because here you can do pitches based on projected future revenues vis-a-vis actual revenues. And this is something that the SEC in the US has mid-year last year put into question and started to look that into more with more scrutiny. But SPACs is a really a domain that is pervasive into the economy. Space has benefited from that, but not only, and I will tell you why. What is also important is SPAC allows companies to raise money, a lot of cash in different ways, but also it's a way for the venture capital firms to exit. And now, if I will just, sorry, I will go back exactly to that graph. You can see that most of the deals, the VC firms started really at the beginning of the last decade. But if you know that a VC fund usually has a life duration of about 10 years, you can see that in between 2011 up to 13, 14, some of the investment here are the ones who exited right now with the SPAC, Planet being one example, for instance. And you can see that some of the initial investors into this company were looking for a way to get out, and to because that's also a sign of being able to leverage your financial investments. In this graph, I put the SPACs involved into the space sectors. So first, and you really need to recall that SPACs, it's not new. It's not because they've become very popular and fashionable in 2021 that they didn't exist before, and that they are stranger to space. Because already in 2008, Iridium, the US company, used a SPAC The same as Avio in Europe, Fiat Avio. Avio went public with a SPAC in 2016. But the trend in the sector really started with Virgin Galactic merging with a SPAC in October 19. And you can see in the bottom of the axis here with Virgin Galactic starting the trend. And what I've done here, I've plotted over this chronological order the time the SPAC were announced, and I've plotted some pictogram to show in which domain they are, up to D-Orbit that was announced last Friday, the Italian in-space transportation services company that announced that it will go public to NASDAQ after its SPAC merger has been concluded. Because here, in black, with the pictogram black, are all the SPACs that have been concluded, that are called de-SPACed. In red are the ones that have been announced but not yet de-SPACed, and that's important. But you can see here what is interesting is that it goes in every domain, from launch services to on-orbit servicing, communication, remote sensing, or infrastructure. Also, in terms of geographies, Europe, Starlogic coming from Argentina, the USA, of course, very New Zealand with Rocket Lab, very diverse. Some very mature, very old. Rocket Lab was created before the 2010. Other ones like Astra in the same domain, very more recent, so very diverse. And also Arquit from the UK. So in total, there have been 15 SPACs deal announced since December 2019 and 12 completed. 3 are still under proceeding. And what is important is that this SPAC allowed space company to raise hundreds of millions of dollars and go public. But since late last year, there have been the interest in SPAC overall has been diminishing, despite the fact that D-Orbit announced it last week. And the market-wide interest was getting slower. What do I mean by that? There were 604 or 605 SPACs last year. Space was about between 1% and 2%, so sizable number, but not that big. But across the board, we've seen that, and not only for space, a higher rate of redemption. So that means people investing in SPACs, when they were proposed a deal to invest, they had the option you have the option to opt out. And a lot of the people opted out because they realized that some of the backing or the foreseen return on investment was not what they were hoping for. And as well, there were more limited availabilities to raise a source of additional private investment in the form of pipes. Nonetheless, that has been providing a lot of resources. But if you look at the stock market, the share prices of almost all space companies that went public via SPACs fell significantly since they entered the market. Nonetheless, SPACs allow those companies to really increase the amount of money that they have in the bank to either accelerate their development, internalize their development, or also acquire potential companies. We've seen that with Astra acquiring external companies, or Spire acquiring other companies. So SPACs is really about allows these companies, these 12 companies, to beat scale, because it go faster access to money, to public money, raise additional capital, and have this first mover advantage. And that's why this is leading really to also a new space economy. So to conclude, it's important to really realize that space is a diverse sector with multiple specificities driven by complex geopolitics. We've seen that with new public players, as well as new market dynamics, a halo sectors with spillovers and implication in many other domains. John Deere, Geely, ExxonMobil, just example of companies benefiting from space and space impacting their business, but also a growing sector in size, scope, impact, and that really picked up speed in the last decade. But space is not a monolith, and some trends applied more to other domains. The main trends are that what we've seen is that there's a robust growth of the sector, really outperforming the overall global economy. We will see now with the tightening of the financial resources, if that will impact new tech sectors in general, if we will continue to have cheap money, and how that will impact the space sector. But we see a growth in both revenue generating commercial space activities and government investment, which is important. We see an increasing number of actors established, but also new ones into the sectors. Also, a growing revenues from the space industries. We can see that with the plan for constellation, LEO telecommunication constellations. There's also space being a part of a variety of business verticals across all domains. And really, one of the salient, the highlights of 2021 showing the new space economy are a volume of private transactions that have never been so high, with 46 billion. A growth in public investments estimated at 8% compared to 2020. We are still in a COVID situation, so but it went. We saw almost 10 billion more public investment into the sector. They were, for the first time, or not first time, but also record of the number of orbital launches last year. We broke the record that is 44 years old, that was established in 1967, with 145 attempts and launch to orbit, compared to 143 in 67 in the height of the Cold War. So that we really need, that's why I'm saying it's a new context. The number of payloads launched jumped by 30% from 2020, but we need to understand that there have been 11,000 satellites launched since the beginning of the space age, and 10% last year. So the numbers are really amazing. We now have 2 space stations in LEO. We have different probes, several rovers on Mars. We have a different mission that went to the moon. We have also 14 civilians that traveled to space, twice the total number of all previous years before. So we can really see that it's changing, and also this start to be realized by the public opinion. And to illustrate that, I want to show this cover page for the Time news magazine, that in December 1968 showed a cover page called "Race to the Moon," where you can see 2 astronauts racing towards the moon, and you can look at their shoulder, the patch on their shoulder. You can distinguish one being the flag of the United States of America, the other one is the red star of the USSR. And now fast forward to July 2019, entitled "The Next Space Race," and you can see there's a bit of change into and a bigger variety of players, and you can still see the USA, but now you see another red. It's the Chinese flag, but also you can see Blue Origin and SpaceX, and you can really see that even in the popular culture, people start to notice. But also that illustrates what I wanted to discuss with you today, that the sector, the economy is changing because you have more players, more government investing larger amount of resources, but also new companies and private sector being involved into that. So for all the students that are online that want to be able to dive more into these topics, I really encourage them to apply to the SSP, the Space Studies programs that will take place in Portugal this summer, because that's where we're gonna dive into these topics, looking into the changes in space policy, space law, economics, entrepreneurships, and so on, to really take stock of the changing space context. And that would be a great way for you also to enlarge and create a new network. So Serge, with that, I close the presentation. And may I give you now the control to see how you want to moderate the discussion.
Thank you again. Thank you very much, Nicolas, for this extensive review of how space works today and how it has transitioned from, I would say, an old time to a new time. And I believe the dynamics are extremely strong on what's going on, as you have shown. So we're really at the beginning of the new curve. And let's see how the curve will unwind in the coming years. I think you gave extremely captivating figures to out of which we can see how the strengths of the dynamics. I think this is very important to capture. I believe it was captured by all the audience. It was nice to have all those numbers in such, I would say, contained amount of time. We learned a lot. I was impressed by what you have covered, of course, and by the understanding you have tried to introduce to us. I think we've learned a lot, and I would like to give now the floor to questions, because I believe there are a lot of questions. I have some, but I refrain to put my questions on the floor right now. I think the best thing to do, since we're not that 100 people around the mic, if people who want to just ask a question, please open your microphone and just go ahead. The floor is yours for questions.
Nicolas, it's Henry. Since you mentioned me a couple of times, I just thank you. It was a good presentation, a lot of numbers, and I don't want to take any issue with them at all. But as you were talking, I just want to raise a few questions for you to think about, and the audience. Because, well, first of all, in terms of defining the space economy, it's very difficult. And most people do it for a purpose, whether it's marketing or government funding. And so the definitions are different, and that's just fine. But first question is, what space company could exist today without the government as either a partner, funder, or customer? So in some ways, what's new about new space? Private sector, and particularly in the United States, has been involved heavily since day one. NASA has every year put about 80% of its budget into the private sector. Granted, things are changing, and I agree with you, but it's more in the way of contracting with the government today. Second, and also what's new about making a profit. That's what business is all about. And have you ever seen or heard any official statement from companies like SpaceX about profits, sales, launches? Sure, and they've been very successful, and they've done some neat technology. But have you heard? I've heard nothing about their profitability. And they're a private company for the most part, so they don't have to. Oh yeah, one thing, you mentioned John Deere, other companies. And the question is, in terms of inclusion, is a customer part of the definition of the industry? We all purchase automobiles, and use them, but are we part of the automobile industry? There's a but-for argument that if we didn't have these space capabilities, certain things that we do, navigation being one of the major ones, wouldn't be possible in the same way. But that doesn't make it part of the industry. And so the bottom line to think about is not space as an industry in itself, but it's still an enabler of more productivity and more efficiency. Very valuable in that context, but not necessarily quite the growth, quite the same perspective as many of the other terrestrial industries that we have. I'm going to stop there, but just questions to think about.
No, but Henry, I'm full on line with you with the sizing, the definition of the space economy. That's why I really mentioned that as well, that to challenge, because some of the reporting, and then you will see that some of the data that are quoted usually by the space reporting companies, from year to year, there's always a growth, and they go up to if you are watching TV through satellite, that counts as part of the sector, and it's very misleading. And that's why also what is a truly space company, if any, they're very limited. So I'm fully in line with you. And also to the point, and that I've not talked about, but for me, the big difference is in the evolution is the way you procure things in the role of the government. And I think that was really allowed the US to take a lead with this innovation procurement initiative after the unfortunate Columbia accident that happened to happen. We are celebrating the anniversary today with the CRS, the cargo resupply, and the way it was initiated by Sean O'Keefe and Mike Griffin, pushed that and ring-fenced the money. That really helped to create an industry that where you had also the players willing to take the risk. That's something in Europe we don't see that much, because we are still at the trauma of the Galileo concession that didn't work with the PPP model. And in Europe, we are not have the industry willing to take such risks. Maybe more the service and application, but indeed, that's where there's a big difference, because new space, now if we talk about new space, means different things to different people. I would argue that in Europe, in the US, it's already new space 2.0, while in Europe, we are still new space 1.0, because it's different type of product we are and magnitude we are putting forward. But indeed, I think there's a clear lack of discussion among, in particular, economists about the space sector. Not space expert talking about the space economy, but economists talking about the space sector. And that's something I think we will launch initiative, and Henry, I will put you in the loop, because that's something CNES, we are doing initiative that will go into exactly that, because it's not trade organization, space trade organization that need to talk about space. This is ethically, it's not the best way.
Thank you, Nicolas. Other questions? Or maybe Henry, you want to top off the comments of that just Nicolas made?
Well, I don't want to dominate the audience questions, but just for one other little point, and that is one of the attractions of the SPACs, which is you talked a lot about, was the lack of regulation in terms of the hype and the expected profits. And you correctly said that the government is beginning to look at that now and possibly temper some of the hype and the expectations that were out there. Also, another thing which you did mention, but in a different context, and that is the mergers and acquisitions of the combinations of firms to get larger. Quite a bit of that investment capital is going to mergers and acquisitions, and they get measured often in terms of expected future profits and net present value of the transaction. And that also has inflated some of the numbers and the investment numbers beyond the reality. So I don't want to go on into too much detail, but there are tempering things in those numbers, even if the numbers are accurate.
No, but I think this is a good point, and that's something. In fact, I'm looking and I'm collecting the data, is to see because when a SPAC is announced, there's the merger and the pipe, and then we can see that there is a lower overestimation at the beginning of the announcement of the transaction compared to the SPAC, which is when you're the exit or the conclusion. You can really see that the proceedings and everything goes down. And what I'm trying to see now is to see if space is different than the other sectors. In overall term, space from the primary data and computed is not that bad compared to other tech sectors. There's a general trend because of the instrument. But now we have to see how it goes over time. The issue is that we have very scarce data point. We are talking about, statistically, it doesn't represent anything. We're talking 13 out of 605, that's nothing. There are still like hundreds of SPACs waiting with money in the bank now that they will invest. So it's also to see some of the valuation that is coming out of it. It's very, indeed, now we need to wait that the dust settled to really see who are the winners, who are the losers, But in my opinion, the winners are the VC funds that made their exit successful with that. And that's a lot of the people do not understand that.
Yes, go ahead.
Alan here. Changing the tack slightly and from a European perspective, do you see an evolving role with the European Space Agency? Do you see their relationship with the private sector changing in the years to come?
Yes, I would say yes, definitely, and that's already changed. You might be familiar with the Agenda 2025 from ISA DG Joseph Aschbacher, was presented in April 2021, where he really wanted to launch, commercialization activities, and he put his words into action, created a new directorate, commercial CIP commercialization, industrial relation and procurement, that is there to look into reaching out to more the private sectors, educating venture funds, but also working with the European investment funds and the European Investment Bank to be able to flag potential startups to new financial investors. But what we need in Europe is to have a more educated investment community, because we have good startups, we have good companies, they are still cheaper in Europe compared to the US. But what we need is that they understand the ecosystem, that you don't have a return on investment over 3 years. It's not a retailer companies, it's very much capex intensive. So they need to do this work, but also to explain that what means in terms of technology maturations, expected return on investment, and so on. So there's still work to be done, but I think we are in the good way, and we need to do it. Otherwise, we will not have the passion capital we need. But also we need to make sure that the European entrepreneurs are willing to stay in Europe, because it's capital is very much accessible in the US. So a lot of them still want to move to the US, and D-Orbit is very much telling. In fact, you are based in the UK, most of the Seraphim Capital supported company, they all go to public market in the US. This is very telling.
Thank you.
Yeah, may I have one? I think we still, we have still 2 minutes, so I don't want to impede other people who want to ask a last question. If not, I will do, but please, the floor is yours for the listeners. Go ahead.
Hi, Mukesh here. SSB 18 graduate as well from the ISU. I'd like to ask you about the data which in principle, according to the Outer Space Treaty, is freely available to all. However, in order to make it useful, it has to be processed into something. And that processed data is not available freely. How would you see, given that this requires investment in massive data processing capabilities and the like, how would you see the developing countries entering the space economy if they don't have this sort of support or resource or facility? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I was today lecturing the board of SAMSA, the South African Space Agency. And in fact, they are looking into ways to understand, so it's the board, so it's the authority governing the space agency, to understand better the space context, to really to adapt to itself, to see really how they can find a niche to position themselves. So I think one of the ways to be able to do it is to take advantage of the fact that there is a lower barrier to entry into the space sector. It has never been so easy to find a launch ride or to develop a satellite. It's a lot of these things are commercially available. You don't even need, you can purchase, you can procure services. You can go to Loft Orbital, to name one of these companies that will do everything for you. And then you even operate, but depending on what you are interested in, if you're interested in data, you can focus into only processing the data back on there. So depending on what you want to do in terms of government, there are different strategies, also in the way you procure things using the type of instrument. If you want to create a business coming from a developing country or least advanced country, It's also easier because there, as I showed, there has never been so many private capital available for space activities. So at the end, it's all, for me, it depends in terms of strategy. What is really the end you want to achieve? Is it as a government to be able to provide a service for your entity, so you can either purchase the services or the capabilities, if you don't want to, if you cannot develop it on your own, or if you're a company, there are ways to do value-added system to existing capabilities that you can purchase, but it depends on the niche markets you want to do it. So it's very dependent of the, or it's context specific, if you want, depending where you are, because it can range from, you know, South Africa to Angola. Those are not the same priorities, or to Vietnam, for instance. So it's very context specific.
Thank you, Nicolas, for your answer. I'm afraid we have passed the hour. We have to finish this webinar. So again, I want to thank a lot, Nicolas, for your excellent and very informative presentation, and the very good answers you provide to several questions. Once again, many thanks also to all the audience who attended today this 1 o'clock lecture. I want to just remind you that we're having our next 1 o'clock lecture, always on Tuesdays from 1 to 2 GMT time. The next one will be on the 15th of February. It will be probably most likely related to space security issues at large. I don't have the exact title for the moment, so I won't give it, but the area will be more related to security at large. So again, many thanks, and wish you all the best. And Nicolas, in particular, to you, who had the, we're very pleased you could make it today, despite your uncertain condition. I hope all the best for you in the coming days. Anyway, thank you, bye-bye, and see you soon, hopefully 2 weeks from now. Goodbye, thank you. Again,
Thank you.
merci beaucoup, Nicolas. Au revoir.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you, Serge.
Thank you, Alan, thank you. I think you can stop the recording right now.